How do we become more innovative? How do we think outside the box? Well, let me share with you what I personally know about Elon Musk. Welcome to the Unstick Your Mind podcast on Mimika TV. Get ready to get unstuck, align with your true purpose, and unlock your God-given potential. Hello and welcome to another episode of Mimika TV. I'm your host, Mimika Cooney. I'm so excited to have you here today with a brand new episode that I've been thinking about sharing for a long time. Now, as you can tell, I have a South African accent, and I do feel this is part of a subject that I actually do have some insider knowledge to share about. And really the subject is the man that we know as Elon Musk. Now, what I wanted to share with you today is something behind what I like to call the mind behind the man. Because Elon and I actually went to the same school in South Africa, were raised under very similar circumstances, and are now living in the USA as entrepreneurs. Now, we hear a lot of things in the news lately about what he's doing and all the controversies out there, but I want us to take a moment just to pause a little bit about what we all can learn from his innovative way of thinking. Now, for those who are not born and raised in South Africa, I just want to give you a little bit of a backstory to really help you understand the framework and the mindset that Elon comes from, so you can better understand and appreciate the decisions he makes today. Now, I will refer to a few things along the way, and even though I will say I have never met Elon in person, we have had very similar paths and have experienced very similar things at similar times. Now, first things first, it is completely true. Elon and I went to the same school in South Africa for part of our high school career. Even though he's a few years ahead of me, I can paint a little picture for you of what it was like being raised in South Africa. Now, just for those who don't know, South Africa in the 80s was kind of like America in the 50s. A little bit behind the times, well, a lot behind the times. Technology was not as far ahead. I mean, things like television was only introduced in the late 70s. So there was a lot of things that us South Africans had to learn to do, that we had to be innovative. Because, as you know, apartheid really separated us from the rest of the world. There was no import or export. And really there's a saying that Elon Musk's own mother has used in her own audiobook. She has used the English version, which is a woman makes a plan. But it really comes back to the saying, 'n boer maak 'n plan,' which is Afrikaans for a farmer makes a plan. Now, we know with anyone who does farming, no one can control the weather. No one can control the outcome, but we can control what we put in to plan for outcomes. Now, 'n boer maak 'n plan comes from our South African mindset that no matter what comes at you, good, bad, or the ugly, you figure out a way, that everything is figure outable. Doesn't matter what circumstances present today, there is always a way to think outside the box. Now, just a little bit of a backstory. Now, during the apartheid era, we were all raised under what was considered a British school system. So all of us kids were at school where we learned, we were told we had to learn languages. So most of us know either 2 or 3 languages. The British school system was based on, a lot of discipline, wearing uniforms. So I even remember as a kid thinking, oh, one day I can wear civvies, which is civilized clothing. And it was really about compliance and discipline and playing by the rules. Now, one similarity that Elon and I have is that we don't really like to play by the rules. We like to kind of think outside the box. And sometimes that gets you in a bit of trouble, especially when you are in a regiment society. But what it does do, it plants the seed and the need and desire and determination to create something more than what you presented with. Because what the world shows you in the environment you're in, when you come from that innovative type of thinking, you're always thinking of what's next or what's more. Surely there's a better way of doing things. Now, at this stage in South Africa in the 80s, there was a lot of political unrest. I remember even my dad, as an entrepreneur, he was always frustrated about the news. Like, you would watch the 6 p.m. news, usually in Afrikaans, and my mom would have to translate. Because we come from the British side of South Africans, which, we all understood Afrikaans, but a lot of the time what was so frustrating was the lack of control. Now, as an entrepreneur, I remember growing up and seeing my dad so frustrated by the politics of the day. They would decide something, and the next day, the cost of goods and petrol and milk and bread would go up. And it was very frustrating because there was no government assistance. There wasn't free healthcare. everything you had to work for. And of course, we were surrounded by poverty. You just needed to go out your front yard, and which is usually behind a gate for security, because security and crime was really rampant, which is still today, unfortunately. But there's always the sense of, how do I protect myself? How do I create something? And how do I find something I can't just buy off Amazon, right? So you are forced to innovate. And I think a lot of us in modern society have become so comfortable with what we have, we've forgotten how to innovate. Now, the other similarities that Elon and I had is both of our parents got divorced when we were both 10. And that definitely had a significant shift and change in our mindset and how we were raised. So we were both raised by very progressive women who, at this stage, as I mentioned, South Africa in the 80s was very behind the times. Women were not given a lot of opportunities. It was very much a man's world. So being raised by women who are very strong-minded, who were determined to do the thing, and might I add, they were both professional models at a time which, getting out of the country seemed almost impossible. And I know, Elon's mom, May, is now a very well-known model, and she's done some amazing things in life, which is just so amazing. But even for her, for a lot of people don't know the backstory of that, with Elon, he also was raised in a very volatile environment. Our childhoods were plagued by, fights and a lot of tension between parents. So having gone through that from a young age, you have to really learn to navigate how to defend yourself, how to stand up for yourself, and how to protect those you love. So being raised by, single mothers in the 80s in South Africa required that women had to go out and work. And in my personal case, my mom didn't have the option. There was no such thing as alimony. Getting child support was a major problem. So she had to go out and make something of herself. She had to work sometimes 2-3 jobs. Now, for many of us who were raised by single parents, we know what that's like. And it creates this burning desire to want to do better, to want to excel, to knowing that there has to be something better on the other side. And I think that's a really key part in becoming so determined later in life. Now, the other thing that, which is unfortunately sad to say that we have in common, is both Elon and I were severely bullied as teenagers. Now, let me just frame this for you. Now, bullying today, we talk about cyberbullying, but back in those days, it was really about people making assumptions about who you are or what station in life, and being raised by single parents who didn't have a lot of money did make it seem a little strange, because back in the day in South Africa, being a divorced mother or from a child of a divorced family was almost taboo. It wasn't even acceptable. It was almost like, oh, what is wrong with that family if they have a divorce? Like, most people would have a lot of problems behind closed doors, but never say anything. So for a woman to divorce her husband was considered very extreme out there. So of course, for those who don't understand your current environment, your situation, and when you are a little different, kids are mean and can sometimes criticize things they don't understand, and oftentimes makes it very hard for you to create something out of nothing when you feel like you're fighting against the current. Now, from what I know of Elon, he had a very tragic and not tragic, but yeah, it was tragic in that it really affected his mindset, is that being bullied, and he was physically hurt as well. Down the same staircase that I know exactly that I walked myself, which was concrete stairs. We had no elevators at school in those days, and you had to change classes. And unfortunately, those who were bigger and stronger and older than you, who didn't understand the strangeness or the way of thinking, or even you would get criticized and bullied for being quiet, which was my case. People would often misinterpret deep thinking for being snobby, or who knows what kids think, right? But at the end of the day, both our parents, both our moms, in his case and in mine, decided that was not an environment we wanted to raise our kids in. We were not thriving. It was not healthy. Needed to think outside the box. Now, luckily for Elon, his parents, his mom was able to get him out of the country, and he finished his schooling in Canada. But like him, both him and I went through the immigration process of what it's like to be an immigrant in a country. Now, for those who come from immigrant parents can understand this a little bit, being an immigrant is when you have no history, you have no support system. You don't have your aunts and uncles and friends around the corner who can come and help with childcare, or who can, pick you up from school, or there is none of that. So you have to learn to innovate. You have to learn to figure things out. You have to become independent before you even think you're ready to become independent. And you have to be willing to take the risk to try something that seems scary and bigger than you can imagine into the unknown, into an area you've never been to, which does come with its own fear, but it's almost like you have to do this afraid. Now, having gone through the immigration system and all the hoops and the loops we had to jump through, and I know in my family's case, took 7 years to go from being an immigrant to becoming an American citizen. And now that we've been here over 15 years, I can say it was definitely a hard road, but it was definitely worth it because we were determined to go through the hard in order to get to where we are today. Because we know that short-term sacrifice means long-term gain. Now, not many people have a long view of life, are not thinking that far ahead. But for Elon, what I love about it is he's always thinking 100 steps ahead of everybody. He's playing 4D chess while the rest of us are trying to figure out where the pieces on the board are. And that's what I love about being an entrepreneur, is that innovative thinking of what could be, what's a better way of doing things. And I always think, if we could adopt that mindset in all areas of our life, from how we run our business to how we raise our kids, I think we will have a much better running society. Instead of always, first instinct is to fight against what we don't know and to fear what we don't know. So some of the innovative mindset tips that I've gathered and having gone through and, really studied Elon and looked at the similarities that we have and really trying to understand it is, how could we teach this to others? How could we ourselves as parents teach an innovative mindset to our kids? Well, first of all, understanding what it's like to live in an oppressive society and having that empathy for something and wanting something more, I think is key. So first of all, and admit I'm guilty of this too, is giving our kids too much, allowing ourselves to almost be lazy in our approach and not allowing ourselves to be pushed past our comfort zone. Because how can we think bigger to make the world a better place? So some of the things that I've learned from Elon's adventures, if we look back at the history of his entrepreneurial career, back when his vision for PayPal was to create something out of nothing. Now, remember that those days we didn't have online banking like we have today, or just paying somebody with the click of a button, right? This was very innovative, and this was also before internet security and all of that. So he was at the forefront and the cutting edge of technology before it became adopted. Now, when you're creating something and you have a vision for something that people are not quite used to yet, same thing with Steve Jobs and the iPhone. It totally shook the world and the way we do life. The same way that cars did in Henry Ford's day when you're used to riding horses. So in Elon's case, PayPal was really an integral part of shifting the status quo. Now, then after he had sold that company, and we don't often hear about the hard times. We just hear about the successes. We know of him as being head of SpaceX. Now, I always laugh about this and joke and say, because back in South Africa when we were kids at school, our teachers would say, you need to pay attention. And I can imagine the teacher and the sound of the voice like, Elon, are you daydreaming of going to the moon again? And he'd probably say in his mind, actually, yes, I am. How many of us were told as kids, stop being a daydreamer, stop thinking and just focus on what's in front of you? And I probably think, and I would agree, this is the worst kind of advice. Where if we had told, what are you dreaming of? What are you thinking of? When Elon was back in South Africa at school, probably bored beyond tears because of the slow pace of the education system, that he was dreaming of outer space. He was dreaming of rockets. So now, as an adult and the owner of SpaceX, he's always thinking of how can we go further and beyond where we are now. And also, if you think about it, how many failed launches has he had? This comes back to the idea of keep trying, right? Failure is not failure. It's simply experiments. Now, in his case, he has the budget to be able to make those mistakes and experiments, but every iteration is a step further. Every failure is learning how to do something better. So again, if we needed to teach this to our children, how do we teach innovation? Is being willing to fail. It's okay if you fail. In actual fact, you should embrace failure and count it as a celebration that you've actually learned something beyond what you know. Now, moving on to what he's doing today, and of course, this big controversy about Elon buying Twitter. And again, I have to have a bit of a chuckle because I just imagine, again, Elon growing up in South Africa and thinking, Where is the town square? Where are people meeting to talk? Where, back in our school days, whenever you went to school, you would have assembly in the morning. Now in South Africa, assembly is all the kids assemble in one area. And in the school we went to, it was usually this concreted centerpiece of where all the buildings were. Then all of our teachers would line us up, and we would get in a straight line behind our class members. And the first thing we would do is, recite the national anthem. And we were all taught to say the Lord's Prayer, and then announcements. And then we were told about what would be happening for the rest of the day. Now, of course, everyone knew that if you wanted to get the message out before the days of email, you would have a bulletin board, which would be usually a cork board or a chalkboard, again, under this, the entrance of where the most of the traffic would be, usually outside the office. So when the kids would bring in their folders and, attendance folders to the front office, it was usually an area, and you knew that people would see it. And what I find amusing today is that the chalkboards of yesterday are now the Twitters and Instagrams and Facebooks of the world. And what I find so amusing about Elon's takeover of Twitter is that he knows where the people are gathering. He knows that if you can get attention and everyone assembles in the same place in order for you to get your message out there, you can be heard. But the other thing people tend to overlook is the sense of freedom. Because back in South Africa in the 80s, you couldn't just say what you wanted to say. You were always restricted. And there was always the sense of you better comply or else. You would get punishment or detention, in our case at school. But what I really appreciate about the fact is that he's always innovating. He's thinking, how can I make this better? Instead of this being a politicized, controlled situation, how do we give the power back to the people? How do we give them a voice? And again, that's an innovative mindset. How can we innovate beyond what we see so we can create the future? And to wrap this up, I will say that one of the things that I think is so key to all of what drives Elon is that he is creating a future for his kids. If anyone knows his story, he has quite a few kids, and I think it's 6 or 7 kids he has now. And everyone thinks like, why would you want to do that, especially in today's society? But let me tell you, our children are the future. Without an innovative mindset, without encouraging creativity, without encouraging entrepreneurship and reaching for further than what we see today, what are we creating for our kids? So in the ways most of us are just trying to reach for the stars, Elon is reaching for Mars. So just think, how can you today embrace an innovative mindset, reach for Mars and beyond to create the world for yourself, your children, and your children's children? I hope you enjoyed this story down memory lane, and I'd love to have your comments and ahas. Click below the video. I'd love to hear your insights and your thoughts on this topic. And if you enjoyed what I had to share today, make sure to share it with your friends. Click on the like button, share with your friends, and I'd love to connect with you. So if you want more freebies that I only share with my newsletter community, go to mimikacooney.com. Until next time, take care. Are you ready to change your brain to change your life? Discover how to break limiting beliefs, stop self-sabotage, and unlock your full potential by rewiring your brain using neuroscience, coaching, and faith-based principles. Come and join my coaching program, Unstick Your Mind, today.